All right, so we were talking a little bit about how racial groups vary on their likelihood to be living in poverty. Weathering is one of the implications of that. When you've had a lifetime that has been full of stresses and medical disabilities, it can cause what we call a high allostatic load. What that means is that your problems kind of accumulate. These kinds of little stressors, little small medical conditions can accumulate into really making you much more vulnerable to serious disease. So by old age, the accumulation of all the past stresses from youth and adolescence and young adulthood and across the period of adulthood can all have accumulated into leading a person to be more vulnerable to serious disease. So what we're seeing in this is just whites and blacks. And what we see here is people who are above and who are below the poverty level. So in the squares, the line that's made up of squares, that is white people whose poverty income level is less than 1.85. So their income is lower. In the white squares, we see whites whose income is more than 1.85 times the poverty level. So you've got in the black squares, whites who have, low levels of income. In the white squares, you've got whites who have higher levels of income. And then you see the same kind of parity going on with the blacks. So you see the black circle indicates blacks whose income is lower than poverty. And then in the white circles, you have black people whose income is above the poverty level. Okay, so now that you know which line represents what and what that PIR means, first thing we'll notice is that for whites whose income is significantly above the poverty level, you see that their probability of illness is much lower. Their allostatic load is a lot lower because over their lifetime, they have accumulated fewer stress-related and physical-related traumas and things that would contribute to that allostatic load, right? You'll notice that when you look at the black circles versus the white circles, there's not much difference in the vulnerability to illness and the contribution to an allostatic load. In fact, among whites who have low income, their pattern looks very similar to blacks, regardless of income, all the way up to about age 40. And then you start to see a separation where whites are not accumulating as many stresses ongoing after the age 40. And so they start to drop down, even though their income is still low, they start to drop down as far as their predicted probability of serious disease. Whereas blacks, regardless of their income, have higher rates of serious disease. So we think that it has to do with, stressors and, marginalization and other kinds of things that happen to them during their developmental years that is probably contributing to these outcomes in their older years. All right. I had a thought on this that I wanted to add in. I don't know if you guys are aware, and I didn't pull any graphs on it because I don't want to completely date my slides, but I want you to be thinking about something that you probably heard throughout the past 2 years with regard to COVID and the higher mortality rate for people of color relative to white people who have COVID. And what you're looking at right now on this slide may be one of the explanations for why that is, that over their lifetime, people of color have accumulated a higher allostatic load so that when something big like COVID hits them, they are more vulnerable to actual, serious disease or death. And so that's something to think about. And that gives us a really good, hard example of something very current that illustrates what we're talking about with this allostatic load. All right, now let's talk a little bit about work, because even though we're over 65, a lot of people still work. I've got a couple of pictures of people who are, we've got a Supreme Court justice, we've got a professor, we've got a greeter at Walmart. A lot of people continue to work well into their 70s and sometimes even 80s, right? If they have fulfilling work that's, probably work that's not as physically challenging, makes it more likely that you can keep doing it. And why would they keep doing it? Well, it provides social support and status. I mean, going to work, seeing your peers, having new experiences. These are really good for the aging person. It gives you a self-esteem boost. Oftentimes you get congratulations at work that you never get at home. Nobody ever says, "Oh, you took out the garbage. Thank you. You're the most amazing person." Whereas, if you get somebody into a class that's overfilled, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you saved me. This is so great. Thank you." Really boosts your self-esteem. This chart shows us the labor force participation rate. In our textbook, they zoom in to 1990 as the starting point, and they show how people over age 65 are really working at a higher rate than they had been before. I thought it would be helpful to show you, hey, let's zoom back to 1948 and show you how the blue line is men, the red line is women, and the green line is the average between the two. And yeah, the line is going up since 1990, but also notice it's way down from the rate of participation. For the men, at least, it's way down from the rate of participation in 1948. About half of men were working over the age of 65 back in 1948. Slowly, they were draining that off till by the time we got to about 1980, we were at the bottom of, really people were retiring at 65. And then, there's been a percentage who have gone back. About 20% of people currently over 65 are likely to be working. Part of it is that we are doing easier jobs now. In 1948, there was a higher probability that the job that the person had was physical. Whereas today, high probability that the job that the person has is mental, right? A lot of keyboarding, a lot of composing, a lot of number crunching, these are a lot of the jobs that we do today. And so there's not as big of a push or need for a person to retire if they have that kind of job. You'll notice the women over 65, their participation in the labor force has been pretty stable since 1948, right? Hovering around, a little bit up, a little bit down here and there, but around 10% of women over the age of 65 are still in the workforce. I think I might have mentioned this before. It's hard for me to imagine that I would stop doing this just because I turned 65, which I just want the record to show is a ways off. It's a decade off. But anyway, it just is hard to imagine that suddenly I wouldn't want to do this anymore. It's really fun to find the newest statistics and the newest data and to tell students about things. And why would I stop doing this? Unless you all start to hate me, in which case I might as well go home. Now, it turns out you don't have to work for pay to get these benefits. A lot of older people achieve these benefits by doing volunteer work. And one of the great things about volunteer work is that, you do it when you want to do it. You're not obligated to do it or you get fired. You can do it when it suits you. And so it's really an attractive way to maintain those self-esteem boosts and so on. So here we have different age groups and what kind of volunteer work they tend to do, right? So percentage volunteering and then what they tend to do. So you'll notice that that black bar is sport, recreation, and hobby. And you'll notice that in the age group between, 35 and 55, there's a lot of volunteering in the sport, recreation, and hobby because, that's our fittest time of adulthood. We're probably good enough at the sport or hobby. We know the rules for it. We can mentor the future. It's a perfect time to be doing stuff like that. So it peaks in that adulthood period and really drops off in the 55 to 65-year-old period. Welfare and community, you'll notice, goes up and up and up across the lifespan. So by the time the person's 55 to 65, that's probably the most likely kind of volunteer work that the person's doing. Education, training, and youth development is that red dashed line. And you see how it goes up and down. But again, it peaks right about when the person probably has their own children in the education system. Right. They're probably volunteering in their kid's classroom or something like that. And so that's why that number probably peaks there. Blue bar with the circles is religious volunteering. And you'll notice that's pretty stable across the lifespan. The green bar is also pretty stable. That's volunteering in health related things, but it kind of ticks up a little bit in the 55 to 65-year-old period. I couldn't find a good chart that showed me 65 and over, so I apologize for it. Ending right at the start of our age bracket, but that's what I was able to find. Environment and animal welfare, it looks like it starts to peak at 45 and then hangs out through, later adulthood like that. And then arts and culture looks pretty stable across the lifespan with a little drop in participation in that in 35 to 44-year-olds who are probably, have children and don't have the time to contribute to arts and culture as much. So when you look across the lifespan, you can really understand why there might be variations in, the kind of volunteer work based on different kinds of topics. The key thing to walk away with, though, is that a lot of volunteers for a lot of different kinds of scenarios are older people because they do have the time to do it. And a lot of times they're women because a lot of times they have the time to do it. So those are really useful activities for keeping the person involved and contributing and so on. Now, one of the reasons why late adulthood starts at 65 is because that's the average age for retirement. People who want to get their full benefits from Social Security want to wait till they're 65 before they start withdrawing. Actually, if you wait till you're 67, you get even more now. So, we're sort of pushing the retirement age a little bit because of that. But retirement is like the big developmental change that's likely to occur during this age bracket. So that's why they sort of started this age bracket with the average age of retirement. So what we all want is to, when we do get to retire, is to, age in a healthy way. And of course, part of it has to do with things you have no choice about, your genes. But a lot of it has to do with lifestyle factors, right? And that's what's going to contribute really heavily to healthy aging. As we age, we oftentimes have to make decisions about where am I going to continue to live? Am I going to age in place? Am I going to stay in the house, maybe where I raised my children, or maybe where I moved to after my last kid moved out, but should I stay here or should I move to a retirement community, or what should I do, right? Aging in place, remaining in the same home, staying in your familiar community. Some people will do that even as their health starts to fade. They'll continue to live where they're familiar, where their things are, where their neighbors are, where they know where all the shops and all the things that they need are, things like that. So some people will opt to stay where they are. Others will find themselves in a naturally occurring retirement community. This is where it turns out that sort of you're surrounded by a bunch of other retirees without even having moved, right? A neighborhood made up mostly of retirees. A lot of people will buy their house, let's say, or their condo, or start renting in this apartment when maybe their children are whatever age, and then the kids move out, and then their neighbors' kids are moving out, and then I still have my friends here who I know and who I can socialize with and stuff like that. One of the nice things about aging in place, and especially aging in place that becomes a NORC, is that you get to maintain your social convoy of people who you've been living near this whole time. My grandfather moved into his house in 1953. He died in 2003, so this is an old story, but new families moved and came and went and this and that, but there were him and like 3 other neighbors who had been there pretty much the whole time. Maybe not since 1953 for the other neighbors, but like they'd been living next to each other for a long time. And that really gave him a sense of community. Like he didn't want to move out. He wanted to stay in his house. He was lucky because his house was single story. It really didn't have any steps in it. So he was able to retire to age. Sorry, that's my dog. Throughout that whole time. But other people, might have a 2-story house, other things that they really have to consider. My husband's home, so I would like to think he would shut the dog up, but okay. Oh, good, he stopped. So another option is active senior facilities. A lot of people are starting to move into these active senior facilities when they're like 50 or 60 years old, and then plan on living there until the end. And they want to be active, and they want to be around other people who, apparently in active senior facilities, it's really popular to play pickleball. So, they want to be around other people who want to play pickleball. In my grandmother's generation, it was shuffleboard, but apparently now it's pickleball. But, and a lot of times in these facilities, they have, hikes you can go on, or art tours, or they have all these things that you can do. And there's a bus that'll take you there, and a bunch of people who you already know who will be going to. And, it's like a really a nice way to stay active, in these active senior facilities. Retirement communities are more honed towards people who are not going to have their grandkids over often. They're not going to be, because in these retirement communities, they tend to not want younger people there too much. They don't want little kids there for sure. So you're allowed to have your grandkids over, but they have to go home. They can't spend the night, stuff like that. And in these retirement communities, there may be communal dining. There's maybe even more degrees of care that you can take advantage of. So retirement communities really vary in how much they provide. Assisted living facilities are for older people who honestly need help, like they can't really take care of their daily things by themselves. So one of the downsides of the active senior facilities, retirement communities, and assisted living facilities is that they are more expensive. I mean, if you've been aging in place, your rent or your mortgage is probably pretty manageable for you, and maybe you don't even have a mortgage anymore because you've been there so long. These facilities you have to pay, obviously. They're going to disrupt your existing social convoy because I bet you can't get your 3 existing neighbors to go with you, right? So you're going to have to make new friends. You're going to have to make a new convoy. They do have that benefit of, having activities and companionship and for sure security that will be available, so you don't have to feel like you're in your empty house in your neighborhood, that nobody's really watching you and stuff like that. So definitely some benefits for the active senior, the retirement, and the assisted living facilities. All right, let's go ahead and take a break here, and we'll come back and pick up with religious involvement.